Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bill Whittle Live, and we're live, and I'm Bill Whittle. How about that? It works out so well sometimes. This is Wednesday, the first day of February. That's exactly what it is. And we are coming to you live from the giant, spectacular Bill Whittle Towers in downtown Los Angeles from the 107th floor of the giant glass tower. It's good to be here, as always. And interesting news today, as always. We have a new Supreme Court nominee, and we've got all kinds of other fun things to talk about today. So why don't we just get right into this? For those people who might be feeling that, well, let me just rephrase that from the beginning. I was one of those people that felt that Donald Trump might be kind of this, liberal in disguise. That was the big concern, right? That Donald Trump was a guy who basically told conservatives what they wanted to hear, and then once elected, or if elected, he would do nothing but, appoint his sister to the Supreme Court, which he actually said out loud. But as every single day goes by, I begin to realize I've been as effectively trolled by this genius as just about everybody else. So we have our Donald Trump's first Supreme Court nominee, and it's a corker. I mean, it's a corker. Neil Gorsuch is Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court. I'm not too up on his background in terms of details, and that's okay because that's not what I really want to talk about. I want to talk about the nuclear option, and I want to talk about the purpose of the court. But just very quickly, what I have read of Gorsuch is just basically spectacular. He's one of these crazy lunatics from the right wing that thinks that the Constitution is law and should be interpreted as law. Wow. I don't know what to do about that. This idea of the Constitution, the progressives, it's very simple. The progressives hate the Constitution. Of course they hate the Constitution. Barack Obama slipped one of these times before he was elected, I think, as president. He said that the Constitution has all kinds of negative restrictions that prevent him from acting freely or something along those lines. Well, congratulations, Mr. President, Mr. Harvard Law student. You finally figured it out. You certainly didn't let it slow you down. So the Constitution prevented Barack Obama from doing all kinds of the things that he wanted to do. And so instead of doing those things, he simply did it through executive orders, which is essentially dictatorship. But the good news is an executive order is not legislation. It can be voided like that. And Barack Obama's legacy is written in pencil. So that's kind of a nice thing. We have to face. It looks like we're overexposed now. Neil, can you bring those levels down a little bit? Just the gamma on those. We were underexposed yesterday. We're overexposed now. Just think of it as a nuclear explosion that's going off, and everybody will be much happier. So we've got a guy who is a strict constitutionalist. He believes that the Constitution's power is to limit government. He believes that that's the reason it's there, and he believes that the founders had the idea in the first place correct. And what do you, it certainly is an indication again that Donald Trump is just for me, he's exceeded my wildest expectations. He seems like a really terrific choice, this Neil Gorsuch, a fantastic choice. Some of the quotes he's had, about the whole thing are great. And so the first point I think we make today is that for those who thought that, that Donald Trump might have been a kind of a, closet camouflage liberal, he's not governing as one as president, that's for sure. He's doing everything he said he would, and I personally don't know how you get a better Supreme Court pick than Neil Gorsuch. This idea on the part of the progressives that the Constitution is a living document. They say it's a living document. What they really mean by that is it should be about as stable as a People magazine article when it comes to the things that they want to do. They don't like the fact that it limits their government. They don't like that fact at all. So they simply do what they can to ignore it. And they put in Supreme Court justices who, talk about the living document, which basically means no document at all. For most of these people on the left, the Constitution is, as I said, I think, the Constitution is essentially a lovely historical document suitable for framing that you might want to put in the rotunda of the Capitol or some other place just to show, our founding heritage, and very much like Washington crossing the Delaware. It's basically just a piece of artwork as far as they're concerned, I think. However, it's not. It's those set of laws that have protected the individual for the first time in history and made a society centered around an individual. And it's simply astonishing what the Constitution actually does. And when you have justices and laws that actually protect the Constitution, you are going to have a healthier society. Neil, let's take it down just a little bit more. Still running a little hot, I think, on both of these. We'll get it eventually. Then there'll be presets. We don't have to worry about it. So we got a really great pick. Donald Trump has, again, lived up to the promises he made to conservatives, at least so far. I haven't heard a single conservative who has a problem with Gorsuch. As a matter of fact, everybody I've heard speaking about him is pretty much over the moon about the guy. But the things I'd like to talk about here are not so much an analysis of Gorsuch and his record, and so you can get those anywhere. I'm interested in a couple of things. I'm interested, first of all, in what the Supreme Court is and has become and what it should be. The Supreme Court, as the founders envisioned it, was never really designed to be a third and equal part of the government. I know that comes as a shock to people because we've been taught since we were in elementary school. At least we were taught that in elementary school. Kids today in elementary school taught that the Supreme Court is simply the instrument for racism and slavery. But we were told that there are three equal parts to our federal government, that there's the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court, there's the executive, which is the presidency, and the legislature, which is the Congress. And that these three would basically pull and tug on each other and make sure the power remained split because everybody was in opposition to everybody else. As I get deeper and deeper into the history of the Constitution, I find out that's not really the truth. For example, again, there's so many things that I didn't know about the Supreme Court that I think really bear on this issue. One of them is this. The Constitution does not specify 9 Supreme Court justices. It doesn't say that at all. How many justices does the Constitution call for? It calls for 1. It says there shall be a Chief Justice of the United States. And the Supreme Court, if it just consisted of John Roberts, that would be constitutionally, would meet the limitations of what the Constitution says for the Supreme Court. That right there is an indication of how relatively unimportant they thought the Supreme Court would be. The founders thought that the Supreme Court would essentially be the top court in the land. In other words, if you've got a dispute about a property line, and you can't get it resolved here in Arkansas, and you can't get it solved in the Arkansas legislature. You got to take it all the way up to the top, and that's basically what it was. The idea that the Supreme Court would overturn a law written by Congress was anathema to most of these founding fathers. Absolute anathema. They simply couldn't even grasp the concept. Their position would be, if the people pass a law, that's the law. If they don't like the law, then you get another Congress to come in and change the law. Me personally, I think to some degree the idea of a court that reviews something for constitutionality to protect rights, if it turns out that a law is passed that limits our God-given natural rights, then I would be in favor of somebody basically striking that law down if it's only to protect the rights as outlined in the Bill of Rights, and anything other than that, the court has no business doing. But that's not how the left works, and it's pretty simple to think about this, really. We have a nation right now of about 320 million people, and the Democrats and the left constantly talk about this being a democracy. But it's not a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic, and a republic is designed to protect rights, not to simply go with the whim of the people. The founders were terrified of actual raw democracy. Now, as it turns out, there are, in fact, some Americans who do live in a democracy. Most of us don't. The huge majority of us don't. But 535 Americans at any given time do live in a democracy. They do get to vote on everything. Their voices are heard on everything. And that would be 100 senators and 435 members of the House of Representatives. That's a democracy. Those people get to vote. Those people live in a democracy, and we don't. We send them to a little democracy and do our business for us and presumably protect our rights. Now, when you think about it, it's easier to convince 435 people to go along with the progressive agenda, or 535 if you include the Senate, than it is to convince 300 million of us. But now it gets really interesting, because when you come right down to it, what's even easier than convincing 535 people, a majority of 535 people, to do what you want in terms of change the laws of this country and throw everything out of balance? Well, it turns out that if you have a Supreme Court that exceeds its constitutional boundaries, then you don't have to even get 535 people majority. You have to get a majority of 9. You have to get 5 people. This is the best way to think about it. This really is. You really just have to think about the left as a group of people that hates democracy, hates the idea of the voice of the public so much that they are now reduced to trying to win a majority of 5 out of 9 votes. That's the entire democracy as far as they're concerned. 5 out of 9 votes, more if you can get them, but 5 out of 9 is the magic number, and then they can get whatever they want. They don't have to convince the rest of the country. They don't have to convince the rest of Congress. This is called legislation from the bench, and basically what it means is that the Supreme Court has so overstepped its powers that it is writing laws or rejecting laws or simply fiating, progressive opinion into existence when it was never, ever intended to do that. One of the things that's so interesting about the fact that there's no number given to the Supreme Court is, in fact, one of the potential weaknesses of the Supreme Court. When all of these progressive maneuvers were starting back in the early 1900s, we had a problem, but FDR decided he wanted to basically just a second Bill of Rights and wanted to utterly, totally remake society. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's not constitutional. We don't, you can't do it. And FDR realized that since there's no limit to the number of Supreme Court justices specified in the Constitution, he said, okay, well, if the 9 of you won't give me what I want, then I'll appoint another 10 judges, and they'll all be my appointees, and then we'll outvote you 10-9. It's called packing the court. And the court was so terrified of this that they basically backed down and gave him everything he wanted. The thing that is the most egregious to me about what the Supreme Court has become is not just the fact that they make legislation. That's horrible enough. But the Supreme Court has become so revered and so sacred in that respect. The left has made them into the champions of justice and the only defenders of moral rights and all the rest of it, that you're stuck with an interesting paradox, and I've always been a little bit proud of this. For example, the Supreme Court has ruled on a section of the Constitution called the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause is in there. It's part of the enumerated powers. It basically says what the federal government has the power to do. And for the last 100 years or so, Congress has used this Commerce Clause to justify anything. Wait a minute, you're gonna force Americans to buy something they don't want? You're gonna make them buy health care that they don't want? You don't have any power to do that. And these idiots or evil swine or both basically say, no, it says right here in the Commerce Clause that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the states. See? And everybody just goes along, oh, okay, well, if it's in the Constitution, I guess you get to do it then. And I was 52 years old before I actually read the Commerce Clause. And this is the kind of chicanery that these people pull off, and this is the kind of thing that has to stop. They basically say that the Commerce Clause says, oh, Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce, among the states. That's not what the Commerce Clause says. The Commerce Clause says that Congress shall have the power to regulate, which means to make even and make regular. It doesn't mean to control, it means to make fair. Regulate trade among the states, foreign powers, and the Indian tribes. So when you realize that there's more to it than the part they quote, all of a sudden it gets very clear. The states, foreign powers, and Indian tribes. When they talk about the states, they don't mean about the people, they mean the states. Basically, the Commerce Clause says that Congress can set things up so that Alabama doesn't get a deal that Massachusetts would get in terms of foreign trade and so on. So unless you're a state or a foreign power or an Indian tribe, unless you're one of those three things, Congress can't touch you or your commerce. They can't do it. Now, people will say, yes, but there's all this precedent. The Supreme Court ruled this and the Supreme Court ruled that, and they had this ruling and that ruling and so on. And I used to buy that. I used to kind of kowtow to, well, I'm not a legal expert, for God's sakes. No, I don't know what's going on. I'm certainly not a constitutional scholar. I guess they must be right. And then suddenly I realized, no, I'm right and the Supreme Court is wrong. And the reason I know I'm right is because I can read an English sentence. I can read and comprehend an English sentence. The entire point of this country was that the people could govern themselves, and the Constitution the authors of the Constitution went to enormous trouble to make sure that the regular common people of the country could understand the laws that they were being subjected to, because if they couldn't, we're right back to an aristocracy again. So I look at the Commerce Clause as a great example of how far off course the Supreme Court has gone. They quote a precedent, and then that gives them another precedent, and they quote another precedent. And people say, well, that's the precedent. And I say, well, then the precedent is wrong. The precedent, not the president, the precedent is wrong. Oh, how can you say that? I can say it because I can read an English sentence. The Constitution has three bodies that it's trying to make a deal with, basically. It's an instruction manual on how to run three different entities, and they're very clear and they're very consistent. They never change. The Constitution talks about these three entities, and they are the United States, which means the federal government, exclusively refers to the federal government when they say the United States. The states, guess what the states mean? The states mean the states. And guess what the other party is? It's the people. Guess what that refers to? It refers to the people. So the Constitution continuously and consistently refers to these three parties, these three sections of society in terms of how to structure the federal government. And it's never changes. The United States, the states, and the people. Now, the Commerce Clause says that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce amongst the states, foreign powers, and Indian tribes. That means the states. If the Commerce Clause said what the progressives want it to say, what Congress wants it to say, then the Commerce Clause would read, Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the people. But it doesn't say that at all. It doesn't say anything like that. They would fall down backwards. Because if Congress has the power to regulate and control commerce among the people, then there's nothing that the Congress cannot do. They can justify anything with this, including Obamacare, this recent nightmare that's destroyed our healthcare system and given people 3 times their health premiums and deductibles, that you need an insurance policy for the deductible now. It's because this court has overstepped its boundaries again and again and again and again and again. And they overstep the boundaries, and the justification that they use is, well, it's a living document and we're just adjusting to the current situation. We're trying to reflect where America is today. America today and America 250 years ago and America 250 years from now is facing the same exact problems, and that is that people want to tell other people what to do. And since that is the case, we have come up with a document that limits these people who want to tell other people what to do. Those limitations don't change. The limitations don't change because human nature doesn't change. This is the essence of the difference between conservatives and progressives. Progressives think that you can just snap your fingers and remake people completely, and you'll have a new Soviet man, or you'll have a new Nazi man, or you'll have a new Chinese man, or you'll have a new Frenchman. You'll have these new people. Now that we've got the smart people are in charge, now these new people are going to cooperate completely, and no one's going to be looking out for the self-interest, and crime will go away. And everybody will work as hard for the goat that everybody owns instead of the one that you own. And all the rest of this nonsense, they believe that people can be remade. And the Constitution is clearly a refutation of that idea. It said, no, people are the same. They're made out of the same stuff. They've been this way throughout all of written history. They studied all of the governments that made up recent history and realized that every government has people in it that go into politics because they want power. They can't get it on their own. They can't earn it. They can't create it. So they want it and they legislate it. They steal it. Basically, they take it. And these powers have to be restrained. These people grabbing authority have to be slowed down and stopped. And so that's why we have the government we have. This comes back to the whole thing that happened today because Neil Gorsuch seems to be a man who understands this. And since the country has been essentially ruled by an oligarchy of 9 people, nine priests in black robes since the progressives really started taking over the pop culture in the 60s. Since then, we have had a democracy of 9 people that get to vote on things who are not elected by the people. The people have no say in this whatsoever. The idea that the court would overrule the House of Representatives and the Senate would have made the founders' heads explode, and rightfully so. That's why a guy like Neil Gorsuch is such an important thing, and that's why that kind of a nomination is such an important thing. It's not just that we get a conservative on the court. It's not just that we might get a favorable ruling on gun rights. It's a guy who wants to put the government back in the box it originally came in. And if we would do that, if we get the government out of the way, of all the stuff it's gotten involved with, then guess what happens? Then everybody gets to prosper and everybody gets to have fun, and politics doesn't run everything in our lives. And we can go back to being a relatively happy, free people, but you got to start somewhere. And it's odd and hard to find a person who understands the concept so well that he's going to vote in order to limit his own power. People like that are exceedingly rare. George Washington was one of those people. Scalia was one of those people. Gorsuch was apparently a real close to Scalia and a genuine philosophical follower of Scalia, and I just couldn't be happier with this. Now, as it turns out, we have been stalling a vote since the death of Scalia. It's been about 10 months, I want to say, something like that. Because the outgoing president and all of his outgoing policies, we have the picture of Gorsuch. We're on the, Neil. Yeah, it's go ahead and show the people these good. Yeah, I should have called for that earlier. There he is. There's President Trump and Neil Gorsuch and his wife. That's the guy we're talking about. Bringing these two people, these two men, plus the lovely wife, are actually making an effort to restore this country to what it used to be when it was a great country. And it was a great country for one reason, and that is it was a country ruled by law. They're trying to reestablish law and law over the government. So terrific. Now, just as a brief aside, there's something kind of fun here, and that is that the confirmation of a guy who's an actual strict constitutionalist, needless to say, puts the Democrats and the progressives into the vapors. They simply start to just have fainting fits and just faint dead away. At the shocking arrogance of it. Nancy Pelosi said he's probably a fine man, but if you eat food, if you drink water, if you breathe air, then he's a catastrophe for you. You know what's Gorsuch's position on Botox allocation, Nancy? Is that what's really scaring you here? What the hell does Nancy Pelosi know anything about in terms of common people in their regular lives? Nothing, zero. So it's a big win if we can get it. Now the question is, can we get it? As it turns out, that we had a rule. It concerned filibusters, and filibusters were basically the idea that a person or a party could delay a vote by simply keep talking about it. It's a little more complex than that. But if you go see the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the whole film is dramatically centered around a filibuster where Mr. Smith basically talks and talks and talks for 24, 48 hours or whatever until he faints and passes away, nearly dies, and so on. Now, this filibuster rule was not written into the Constitution. It's not built into the structure of how the House of Representatives work. It's a tradition. It's a tradition that held for 230, 240 years, something like that. Both parties agreed that it would be in the interest of themselves at some point in the future and in the interest of the American people to be able to slow something down, to be able to slow it down. The whole government's designed to slow things down, but the filibuster was designed specifically to slow things down. Now, this tradition, as I said, had lasted for damn near a quarter of a century until Harry Reid, who is without question the most immoral, evil, awful, corrupt, stupid, short-sighted, miserable, mean-spirited, nasty bastard who's ever held office in that Senate. This selfish, greedy, visionless fool basically had a vote that he wanted. He was the Democratic majority leader for a while, and he wanted a vote. And he couldn't get the vote through a simple majority, so because the Republicans were going to filibuster it. And Harry Reid did something called, he used the nuclear option. The nuclear option is called the nuclear option not because it deals with nuclear weapons or anything. It's called the nuclear option because it is the World War III. It is the destruction of the filibuster. You either agree as gentlemen and ladies to have the filibuster or you don't, because it's not written into the law. So Harry Reid decided he wanted a vote, and so he simply said, we're going to overrule the filibuster. We're just going to overrule it. You don't get the filibuster anymore. I've decided. And that rule, which had lasted for a quarter of a century, was broken. Harry Reid pushed the button on the nuclear weapon, destroyed the rule of the filibuster, destroyed that tradition, and now the Democrats are astonished, shocked. They're mortified. They're filled with fear of the oncoming Nazi regime. And Cheeto Hitler is gonna next thing he's gonna do is put people into camps because the Republicans have decided not to honor the filibuster. Well, we honored the filibuster for 250 years. It was the Democrats who broke that tradition. It was the Democrats who took away from this remarkable, interesting, weird sort of a concept that had developed among politicians. He destroyed it, and now they want us to go back. And this is all the left does, and it's what they do all the time. A law is a law that applies to you, and it's sacred religion until it's no longer of benefit to us, at which point we ignore or we change the law. And once the law has been eliminated, then that's great for us. But when the Republicans come back into power, then that law has to be reinstated, and it's sacred and noble, and who are we to deny the power of the law and so on. This is how these swine work. Well, guess what? We're not going to go back to the pre-filibuster days. We're not going to be Gentleman Jim, who simply gets the living stuffing pounded out of him. We like the filibuster. We thought it was a good idea and tradition, but the Democrats have pushed the nuclear button. They broke that rule. They shattered that tradition, and now we're going to shatter it back. Now we're simply going to say, no filibuster for you. It's over. It's done. Harry Reid destroyed it, and it's gone. Now people say, well, I don't know if we should be fighting as dirty as they do. It's like, you fight as dirty as your opponent is, right? If you want to stay alive, you have to fight as dirty as your opponent is. Honorable people, good people, play by the rules. They play fair. They honor agreements. They honor traditions. They do all of those things. However, if it turns out that their opponents don't fight by the Marquis of Queensberry rules, that they'll stick a shiv in your back the second you turn around, well, then you have to prepare yourself to fight those kind of people. An honorable country fights honorable battles by the rules, unless they're fighting an enemy that's dishonorable, that doesn't play by the rules, in which case we have a decision to make. Stick to the rules and die, or fight the way they fight. And as far as the nuclear button goes and the filibuster and all the rest of it, here's the best story I've heard on this, and then we'll move on to our second topic very briefly. We had a premiere of a video for you today. In the Battle of Guadalcanal, it was the first time when our American Marines really first got to meet the Japanese face-to-face and up close and personal. And the Americans won the battle for that main island, and they took the main island. And after the main island was secured, there were a number of little tiny islands out in Iron Bottom Strait there in the gaps between the islands. Some of them very, very small islands, Gilligan's Island size. And on one of these little islands, in the beginning of the Guadalcanal campaign, there was a small outpost of Japanese soldiers who'd been cut off. Their navy had retreated. They'd given up on them, left them there to die, and they were starving. And one day, the Marines look out at this island, which is some significant distance out to sea, and they realize that the Japanese soldiers are waving a white flag. So, being decent, honorable people, the Marines send a party over there, and they're going to accept the Japanese surrender and give them some food and make them prisoners of war the way that we do with any other honorable opponent. And when the Marines got out of their boat and started walking towards the white flag in order to begin the surrender process that they've indicated by the white flag, the Japanese drop the white flag and open fire with machine guns, and they kill every single one of the Marines that went over there. And my understanding also is that if any of the Marines had a tattoo of the globe and anchor on their arm, then they would hack that arm off with a samurai sword and stack them in a little pile. And after that, the Marines didn't get along quite as well with the Japanese. The way we treated the average Japanese soldier was different than the way we treated the average German soldier. We treated the average Wehrmacht soldier with a lot more respect because, by and large, they were honorable people fighting in uniform and obeying the rules of law, and the Japanese weren't. However, these polite and civilized courtesies did not extend to the SS. If you were an SS officer in Germany and you had been part of the massacre of American prisoners, then all of a sudden you're suddenly not going to get the benefits that everybody else gets. To me, this is not just good sense; it's survival, and I don't see anything dishonorable about it. You come to a fight, or you come to a meeting, and you do the honorable thing. And if somebody's going to screw you over and do everything they can to cheat you and beat you unfairly, then you either descend to their level and beat them, or you stand there and die. And if all the good people are dead, who's going to stop the bad people? So many of the left just want you to lie down on this altar of moral self-righteousness and just simply commit suicide for our principles. No, our principles are sound and our principles work really well, and we love applying principles of fairness and decency to everybody. But if they're going to fight dirty like terrorists, if they're going to hide behind women, if they're going to hide in populations, if they're not going to wear a uniform so that we can identify them so that we don't harm civilians, then they got a different set of rules. They don't get to go to prisoner of war camps. They go to Guantanamo Bay because they're not soldiers, they're not wearing uniforms, there's no command structure, and there's no way to surrender. Pretty simple, really. Some people don't get it, but there you go. Anyway, that's the short form on the Supreme Court pick. I couldn't be happier about that. And again, Donald Trump is is certainly impressing me and eliminating many of the fears, or I didn't say fears, really is not exactly right, worries, concerns that I had prior to his election. I've been very, very impressed. Okay, boy, we're out of time, so we're not going to do a commercial for BillWhittle.com, which is what brings you this program and all the rest of them. We're just not going to do that commercial because I think what we're about to show you is the commercial. Just hang on one second. Yesterday we premiered Money, which was the first of our TPUSA videos that we're working with Turning Point USA on. And the short form is that my feeling is that so many kids on campus become socialists because they think socialism is fair and they think capitalism is evil. So yesterday we talked about money. It was a little 3-4 minute video. We've got a little 3-4 minute video today that's number 2 in the series, which is socialism. Tomorrow we'll do number 3 in the series, which is capitalism. And at that point we're going to go out and make some new ones. But just before you watch this, I want to remind you that this is made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, and this is designed specifically for young people. It's designed specifically for them to understand what is actually going on in the world. And I can tell you from personal experience that if we make the kind of argument you're about to see often enough, we will be able to convert huge swatches of those people. The number of people who get to see them are determined by the number of members we have here. It'd be nice if I was funded by the government, but if I was, I wouldn't take it anyway. So there you go. This is Free Enterprise Going to Save This Country or Not? In any event, this is part 2 of our We the People version 2.0 series using all of the things I've been talking about with iconography and graphics and so on. And we'll roll that, and then we'll do a quick comment, and then we'll call it a day. Socialism is an economic system where high and low incomes are essentially tossed into a giant pot called the state and then redistributed more or less equally. That's why so many people think that socialism is more fair than capitalism. But let's see how fair all of this sharing really is. Let's take 10 randomly selected people and put them on a football field and tell them to run the 100 yards from one goal line to the other. Now, equality of opportunity, that's capitalism, means that everyone starts at the same line. No one should be allowed to start ahead. No one should be held behind. And when they start running, some people are going to run faster, some are going to run slower, and this creates unequal results. People cross the finish line at different times based on how fast they can run. Now, socialists think it's unfair that some people can run faster than others and that some are left behind. They want people's cars, houses, salaries, all the rest of it to be more or less the same. The equality of socialism is not equality of opportunity, but equality of result. Equality of opportunity means everyone starts from the same line at the same time. Equality of result means that everyone finishes at the same line and at the same time. Now, here's why socialism sucks. If everyone is forced to finish at the same time, then the entire race has to be run at the speed of the slowest runner. You can't run faster than you can run, and that means that every single one of the other people on the field have to be slowed down. Aha, you say, but socialism means that the fastest people go back and carry the slowest ones over the line. But like it or not, people do not behave that way. And I can prove it, because if you're one of those people who call yourselves socialists, well, then you should take your iPhones and your Xboxes down to a pawn shop, collect the cash, and distribute the money to the homeless. Some people are all about wealth redistribution when it's somebody else's wealth being redistributed to them, but when it's time to redistribute their own wealth, all of a sudden they're rock-ripped capitalists. The fastest runners do not go back and carry the slowest ones, and if they're forced to do so, then they simply do less work and slow down. I mean, why? Why run as fast as you can when the faster you go, the more weight you have to carry? Why study like hell for 15 years in order to become a brain surgeon when you're just going to get the same paycheck, the same house, the same car as a barista at Starbucks? You bust your butt for 15 years studying for your entire youth, and then most of that work gets taken away from you by force to pay someone who does nothing but get high and play video games all day? That's fair? Socialism doesn't turn baristas into brain surgeons. Socialism turns brain surgeons into baristas, and it gets worse. Socialism doesn't work because it's a pyramid fraud. Now that's where the first ones in get paid by those who pay to get in second, and so on. A pyramid fraud pays off only when there are constantly more and more people coming in at the bottom to pay those above them. If you run out of people at the bottom, well then, you're boned. 4 people can work hard enough to support one person for his entire life, but one person cannot support 4. And for decades now, the population of these European socialist countries are not growing, but rather shrinking. So in order to keep the pyramid scheme going, they have to import new people from high birth rate places who, generally speaking, are not that interested in putting in a lifetime of work to support other people. They're interested in all of the free socialist benefits, and many of them are very interested in their religion. Oh, and by the way, Fidel Castro, socialist hero, champion of the new socialist working man and woman who work as hard for other people as they do for themselves and who share everything equally. Well, Fidel died recently. Cuban socialism meant that his people barely had enough to eat for 3 generations, but at least they were all starving equally. When socialist icon Fidel Castro died, his personal net worth was $900 million. Suckers.